Okay, so I want to look at the game design process on a ground level and show you what I've been doing. Now, I have no idea what anybody else is doing, and this is part of the reason why I'm making these videos. The board game design videos that I watch, a lot of them have been great. They've been, very interesting, and especially if you're brand new to the endeavor, you got to get that tip of the iceberg stuff down. Play test your game. Game design is a process of iteration. These fundamentals. But I'm really looking to see what designers are doing. How are they actually working? How are they figuring out whether a card has, an attack power of 2 or an attack power of 4? Are they purposefully designing every combo in the game? Are they kind of just making the cards with some general ideas and then seeing what happens in play testing? What's the actual process look like on the daily basis? And I just don't see those kind of videos, so I figured I'd make them, and hopefully as we talk about it, we kind of can get a peek into what each other are doing, because I think most of us are just kind of doing this on our own. Probably we don't have a big support system around us. We might be on Board Game Designers Forum or something like that, but probably the people in our lives aren't designing games for most of us. We're the only ones doing it. We don't really have anyone to talk to. You try and tell your mother about it, your wife about it, your kids about it, and their eyes kind of gloss over, and this is not a very popular activity. So I'm going to show you what I'm doing, and we can talk about it as we go along, and then maybe if you wouldn't mind just letting me know what you think about what you see, and if you do it different, or if maybe you see a chink in the armor, something I could do a little bit differently. So this is just what I've come up with on my own. I work in Microsoft Word. Here you can see the game that I'm working on right now is called Recitals of Redimere, the Orctide. And this is a deck building game. And so what I've done is I've created a couple of different files that I kind of switch between as I'm making the game, and I basically write the rules and design the cards, and those two things together are the creative process for making the game. In addition to that, I have a notebook, and I'll use the notebook to jot down notes when I'm out of the house, or if I'm just sitting there, I'll write down some stuff as I get ideas, and then I'll transfer them here. But this is the game right now. You have what I call the general and rules document, which has general information. As you can see here, Recitals of Redimere is a deck building game that recounts various times throughout the history of Redimere. The first installment, the Orctide, allows players to play through the events of the tragic insurgents that pushed men out of the West and incited the Great Mage War. So this is the thematic context for the game, as well as letting you know what kind of game it is. 2 or 4 players battle head-to-head or in a team game to control locations and capture the opposing faction's captains while accumulating victory points. So this is kind of just going to let you know what the gameplay is about. And so you see, this is a general document talking about the game, and in addition to that, it has a rules glossary. Now, let me just lower this music a little bit, because I'm hearing it a little loud, so I just like to have a little something on in the background, kind of sets the mood. For myself as I'm designing, it kind of gets my head in that space a little bit better. This is a fantasy, I guess you could call it like a fantasy adventure deck building game. It's not much of an adventure, more of a war. So yeah, the rules glossary is something that I've come up with relatively recently, in terms of being able to record my ideas in a rule book kind of way, because I find that useful, but at the same time not getting bogged down with, when I'm talking about allies, where do I fit that in the rule book? How does that relate to what's already been put into the rule book? This way, if I want to talk about allies, I jump in, I've put it in alphabetical order, boom, allies, I write what I have to say about it, and I go on. it doesn't impede the creative process by considerations about how the rulebook should be laid out. But everything is written here. All the rules of the game are written under their respective headings. And at the end, when the game is all set and I've made all the changes, I'll sit down and write the rulebook from this document. So as you can see, not all the letters are here. I basically put them in as I need them. Like right now there's no Q because we don't need Q. So when we need Q, we'll put it in. If we don't, then we'll never have it. And here's notes, things that I just want to remember but are not really structured enough to put into the rules glossary. So this is the first part of my process, writing the rules to the game as I go. The second document is the cards themselves. So here you can see the card allotment. This has all the different cards for the game, and here's where I actually create the game. This is a card game, so there's not going to be anything else, but almost all of my games, if not all of them, have cards, and they're a big part of what drives the game. So I have templates, so when I want to make a new piece of equipment, I just grab this, copy it, bring it down to where it belongs, and then I fill in all the necessary information. And then you can see on the side here that I got everything structured using these headings to kind of keep it organized. So if I want to tighten it up, here's the two factions, the Champions of Redimere and the Unified Orc War Clans. So all of their cards are going to be under their respective heading, and then there's all the different kind of cards, and I can jump right down to where I want to be and drop in whatever I want to drop in. For this particular game, I have a third document, which is the Lore Book of Redimere. Now, this Redimere thing, it started as an adventure card game that I wanted to make, and I had an idea for the game, but I didn't really have a world to put this game in. So I started designing the world, and that world is Redimere, and it just kind of took on a life of its own and expanded out, and now I have this history, and I have these eras, and these different things that happen within each of these eras, and I actually have 7 other games that are in different stages of the design process, all dealing with this world. So this has really gotten fleshed out as we went along. And so the Lore Book of Redimere kind of keeps all that stuff organized. So when I create a new character on a card, I come in here and I put an entry in for that character. So it reminds me of who he is and what he does. And these are things that I could use to add flavor to the game. Sometimes if I'm looking for flavor or a card idea, I can come into the lore book and I can, get an idea there. Because sometimes I think of things for the world without, designing anything for them game related. I'm just, washing the dishes and I think of something for the world. I'll come in here, I'll enter it. And so there's things in here that are not in the game, but everything in the game winds up in here as well. And again, I use a glossary format, and I have the 3 eras as the main heading groups for these. Oh yeah, and you can see all the games here are listed as to which games go with which era. So if you played these, right now we're up to 8 games, which is ridiculous, but hey. If you played through all these games, you'd play through, the written history of this world. So for me, it's epic. I don't know if anybody else would care about this, but if I can get all these games completed, for me it would be a masterpiece just to have for myself, because this thing is really grown into something very expansive. So the lore book we just jump to every now and then, but the most work's going to be done here. So let's take a look at what I have so far, and let me know as we're going along. Is there something you think should be there that isn't? Again, I don't even know what percentage I would say this game is completed. Probably not much, maybe 15% or something like that. I just started this not that long ago. Maybe I don't even know if it's been 2 weeks. So I do not have many cards for the game written yet, and this is just preliminary, but definitely if you notice anything, let me know, because I want to, get some other ideas. I've been doing this on my own and haven't talked to anybody other than the few back and forths I've had on Board Game Designers Forum. So I don't know what anybody's doing out there, and I don't know if, what I'm doing makes sense. It makes sense to me, though. So let's take a look. Anything you see in red like this, see, works much like the DC Ultimate Showdown. This is something that's going to be removed later. It's just a note to myself. This game actually got started because I had written a variant rule set for the DC deck building game. Because obviously the thing with the DC deck building game is that it doesn't have a lot of thematic context. You know, Wonder Woman is fighting Batman, but not for any particular reason, and they might take a jab at each other every now and then, but basically they're both trying to fight off enemies and recruit heroes, and, you know, so I don't have a problem with it. It's a great game. It's a fun game. But I wanted to give it more thematic context. So after I bought the Forever Evil set, I wanted to make, you know, good guys versus bad guys, and I designed a rule set to accommodate that. Funny enough, I went into the rulebook and saw that they had done a good guys versus bad guys variant, which included some of what I had come up with. Because what I had come up with is very intuitive. I mean, I think anybody would have come up with this idea of putting the good guys versus the bad guys, having the good guys recruit the heroes, having the bad guys recruit the villains, and, you know, never the two shall meet, so to speak. The good guys deck would not include villains in it. And then I went on to include other things like captains and, you know, how you use the victory points and things like that. And this variant kind of got kind of big and it was working, but some of the cards didn't really fit perfectly with the new variation, because those cards are components to what's essentially a different game. And I said, man, if I could just write these cards over, just these few, you know, 10 cards that just aren't fitting quite right, if I could just rewrite them, this game would be perfect, you know? And I said, well, wait a minute. If I just made this variant into my own game, I could write whatever I want. And so that's what I did. And then from there, it expanded out to include other mechanisms and other things. And so now we have this, this game here. So this was a note to myself about how the game basically works. But this was like I wrote on the first day. I really don't need this anymore because the rules have been written, so I know how it works. So here are the factions that each player can choose from. The Champions of Redimere, which include men, elves, and dwarves, or the Orctide, which includes the Concord Orcs, the Xanth Orcs, or what I've decided to just call the Xanthan Orcs, and the Blood Orcs. So you have 3 Orc factions and 3 Champions factions. The win condition, when a faction captures the opposing commander, the game ends immediately. However, the capture of a commander does not ensure victory. Their plans may still succeed despite a loss on the battlefield. The factions then add up their victory points, and the faction with the highest total is crowned the victor. Okay, so this is going to be an end condition, capturing the commander. It's not going to be a win condition. The win condition is going to be victory points. However, as an optional alternate win condition, which I'm calling cut off the head, if the players would prefer to simplify the endgame process, they may ignore victory points altogether and decide that the first faction to capture the opposing commander wins the game. This decision should be agreed upon before beginning play, as it will likely alter the strategies employed by the players. So if you don't want to get into victory points, you could just simplify it by saying, hey, the first one to capture commander wins the game. And that makes thematic sense. It does change the strategy a little bit, though, because as you know, if you've played, you know, the DC deck building game and the other Cerberus engine deck building games, or any deck building game really, victory points are a big part of what you're thinking about when you go to buy a card. Sometimes you're like, those abilities are okay, but you know, it does have, you know, 2 victory points. So, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and get that card, whereas otherwise I might not, you know. So I can't get this music quite low enough. Yeah, I want it just to be there to get me in the right headspace, but not getting in my way. All right, so that's the win conditions. I think that describes what's going on here. I spoke a little bit about the theme of the game, how you're going to play the game, what you're trying to do, the different factions you could use, and then the win conditions. This factions part probably will go somewhere else, but here it is for now. So do you have a sense for what's going to happen in this game? I mean, just overall, you know, thematically, and understanding that it's a deck building game, we're trying to get victory points. I mean, that's there, right? I think that's cool. Let me know what you think about what's written there. Okay, so now in the setup section, the setup here seems complicated at first because it's kind of like more of a legendary. You're picking out different things and mixing them together and whatnot. So I tried to break it down as cleanly as I could, but you could see there's quite a few bullet points. So let's take a look as we read through it and see if this is fairly clear. I tried to kind of trim the fat as much as possible. I think it's okay. Let's take a look. Okay, so each player chooses a faction, one of the two factions earlier mentioned. There must be 2 opposing factions used, with an equal number of players for each faction. Okay, so you're going to have either 1 player on each side or 2 players on each side. Because remember, up here it says that 2 or 4 players battle head-to-head. So this is a 2 or 4 player game. Now, each player chooses a faction group, and one of the 2 faction leaders from that group. Their faction leader card is placed in their play area. So you chose a faction, now you're choosing a faction group. I don't love the fact that it's faction and then faction group. Even though the group is a subset of faction, I don't like the word faction being in both of them. But I wasn't really sure if I should change this. Is it good that it shows it's a subset by including the word faction? Or should it be just called something else? You know, in Marvel Legendary you have like henchmen, you know, and then you have like villain sets, right? So this is the subset. So you're going to pick a faction, the champions or the orcs, and then you're going to pick whether you want to be the elves or the dwarves, or you want to be the Concord orcs, or you want to be the Xanthan orcs. So you're going to, pick one of those faction groups. And then there's 2 faction leaders for each of those groups. You're going to pick one of them. So that's kind of like your player card. That's kind of who you are for the game. Again, at any step of the way, if you think something's not clear, just stop for a second, jump in, quick comment, let me know, so we can get some talk going about it between us and kind of refine these ideas for both of us, or all of us, how these things should be phrased and whatnot. Okay, so each player shuffles the stack of 10 basic units from their faction group and places it to the side of their faction leader card, face down. So each faction group has 10 basic units. You're going to take those, shuffle them, put them face down in your play area, next to your faction leader. Each player takes the 5 captains from their faction group cards and places them to the side for now. Their remaining faction group cards are placed in one stack. This is the first step in forming the main faction deck that will be used during the game. Now in the team game, teammates create one stack using all of their remaining faction group cards. So each player doesn't have their own deck, each faction has their own deck. Okay, so you're going to remove the 5 captains, put them to the side. Everything else that's left, you're just going to have it there in a stack. Okay, that's going to be the beginning of the main deck that we're going to use. Now you're going to take all of the neutral cards, the gold bordered cards, and remove the locations, placing them to the side. The rest of the neutral cards are shuffled together and divided evenly between the 2 factions. So you should have 15 cards for each faction. These neutral cards are placed on top of the faction group stacks made in the previous step, as they will be included in the final faction decks. So the neutral cards are going to get divided evenly between the 2 factions, and you're going to put that on top of the stack you had already, and later on we're going to shuffle these all up and make a deck out of it. Now shuffle the locations and randomly deal 2 to each faction face down. These are also placed on that faction group stack. The unused locations will not be used for this game, so place them into the game box without looking at them. That way, by process of elimination, you can't figure out what's been randomly dealt out. Okay, so now we're calling these faction group stacks because they're the faction group cards, and it's not really a deck yet. It's just a stack of cards. We're going to add more cards to that stack, shuffle it up to make the main deck. So I'm not calling it a deck yet. It's not the faction deck that's going to be used for the game. So I'm just calling it the faction group stack. I don't know. In the variant that I wrote for the DC deck building game, I was calling this the setup deck. I think that was good because it indicated that it's only used during setup, and it was a way of referring to that deck without calling it the main deck, because it wasn't the main deck yet. So what do you think about the setup deck versus the faction group stack? you know, I don't know. Setup deck sounds cool, but this faction group stack thing kind of evolved organically as we were talking about, you know, the setup. So that's why I kind of left it the way it is. So I'm not sure. What do you think about that? I don't know. Okay, so each faction shuffles all of their captains and draws 5 of them face down. The unused captains will not be used for this game. Place them into the game box without looking at them. Alright, so here you see the unused captains will not be used for this game. Here, the unused locations will not be used for this game. So I kept the phraseology the same for these 2 sentences, right? I mean, you've seen this before. Hopefully, this kind of lets somebody breeze through it. You know, the unused locations will not be used for this game. Place them into the game box without looking at them. Okay. Then we get here. The unused captains will not be used for this game. Okay, yeah, I know. Like the last time, right? Okay, so a little something we could try to use to expedite this process. I mean, a very minor point, but again, I want to get into the nuts and bolts of what we're thinking when we're designing and what tools we have at our disposal to facilitate this process, especially right now we're talking about rules, you know, which is a chore for people when they're going to play a game, having to learn the rules. So any little thing we can do to kind of just put some oil slick down and get it moving, right? And I mean, I think I've seen this before plenty of times in other rule books, so this isn't news, but just something I wanted to point out. Now each faction places one of the captains near their faction leader card. So we drew 5 of them. We're going to put one of them aside near the faction leader card. This is their commander for the game. The other 4 captains are spread out on the table to begin 4 new stacks of cards. So you got 5, you're going to take one and put it aside, that's going to be your commander. The other 4 are just going to get laid out on the table as the base for a new stack of cards. So you see this captain is going to be one of the 5, and that's going to be different every game. Now alternately, you know, we'll write it somewhere here, you can choose which one is your commander, and you can choose the order in which these other 4 will appear. But we're doing it random here. As I played, I liked doing it random. It was kind of fun to see who came out first, who came out second, and who the commander was. Because it's like the commander was working behind the scenes the whole time. Because he does have a little something going on with him that he's going to contribute in a broad sense. So it's like, who was it that was pulling the strings? Bam, there he is at the end of the game. After you defeated all the other 4 captains, the commander comes out and reveals himself. And because there was more than 5, because you could see you shuffle all the captains and draw 5, there's more than 5, you don't know who that commander is going to be, even after you defeated the other 4 captains. Now, that's something I wanted to address. There's 6 factions in the game, right? So if each has 5 captains, that would be 30. If each has 10 captains and you draw 5, which allows for this randomness and this surprise factor of not being able to use process of elimination to know what's coming, that doubles the amount of cards. Now, from a game design standpoint, that's no problem. There's, you know, it's only 1 card per captain. You know, it's not a big deal. I could write up captains all day long, I'm sure, if I put my mind to it. But from a production standpoint, and I don't like to think this way too much when I'm designing, but I can't help but just consider, you know, the publisher's end of this. If you bring this game to a publisher eventually, which, if it's complete and I think it's good, I would, you know, then that's like 30 new pieces of art, you know. I mean, I wouldn't even go to 10 probably. I might do 8. But still, you know, you're tacking on another 3 times 6. It's 18 pieces of art. It's, you know, I mean, it's kind of a big deal, isn't it? I don't know. I mean, I'm not a publisher, but I know art's expensive. I have had art done before. You know, I've heard people say that art is expensive and a big consideration for publishers. So do we keep it to just 5 captions per group? And they'll be randomized. You'll have some idea of what's coming as they get eliminated. But is that really a big deal? Is this enough of a cool thing, having this be completely unknown, to warrant 18 new pieces of art? I mean, maybe that's a consideration for the publisher. I'm sure it is. You know, but I would like to bring a game to a publisher that has their concerns in mind to a certain degree. I can't know all their concerns, so I don't even want to try to go there too far because I might make mistakes, cut out things they would have liked. But in this sense, you know, it's just something to think about, something to talk about. How do you think about that? Do you consider it when you're designing a game? Should we just kind of just go at this creatively and forget that side of it? You know, I mean, what actually got me started thinking this way, because I used to just design creatively and didn't think about publishers at all, is I had a game that had 800 cards in it. And I tell you, I write cards all day. I love it. I mean, that's the process for me. That's getting to sit and reside in that creative space is what I enjoy about this activity, you know, so I don't mind writing up 800 cards. You know, but that was kind of like, wow, all right. I mean, nobody's going to want to make this game. 800 cards, and there's a board that's like, you know, 2 feet by 3 feet, and there's tokens and miniatures, and I mean, this thing would be like $200 by the time you get done with it. You know, so all right, instead of minis, you do standees. You know, maybe you duplicate cards a lot, you know. Because in another game I did, there was about 400 cards, and they were all one-shots. All the cards were different. I mean, that's a ton of artwork. You know, unless you do something like Mistfall or, you know, what the original core set of Modular Legendary did, which is have different cards with the same art on it. But that rubs everybody the wrong way. You know, that's not on par with industry standards, really. So yeah, I don't know. For now, I'm going with maybe, let's say 8, and we'll draw them up just so you get a little variation from game to game as to which captains you have when you're using that faction. All right, so let's see. Okay, so we began 4 new stacks of cards, a captain at the base of each. Each faction now shuffles their faction group stack thoroughly and places 9 cards on top of each of their 4 face-down captains. Okay. Each faction now has 4 stacks of 10 cards each. 9 that you just put down on top of the 1 captain. Alright, so that faction group stack we've been making, you're going to shuffle it up now with those neutral cards, with those locations. And you're going to deal out 9 cards on top of each of those captains. So you got 10, 10, 10, and 10. And now each faction places the first stack on top of the next, then that combined stack on top of the next, etc. until each faction has a stack of 40 cards. This 40 card stack is then placed on top of the remaining cards in the faction group stack to form the final faction deck that will be used for the game. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear people reading rules, it sounds like mumbo jumbo, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what they're talking about. But, you know, pause it and read it if you're interested, you know, in this discussion. I mean, does it sound right? Does it make sense? Is it clear? I've read over it many times, and this is to this point as clear as I, you know, thought it needed to be. I think it's pretty clear, but you know, again, to me, these ideas are not new. If you just picked up this game and you're not familiar with these kind of games, this might be a little like, oh my god. But you know, most of us, if we're to the point where we're designing games, we played a lot of games. This is not a new idea to, you know, arrange a deck in this way to kind of stack these things on top of each other, and then you got your deck, and that allows things to come out at certain times. So basically, a captain's going to come out every 10th card, and 4 of them are going to come out. So after you make your way through 40 cards in the deck, there's not going to be any more captains coming out, and those are all just randomized down there. And these top ones are mostly randomized, but those captains aren't. They're coming out every 10th card, which I like because it adds another layer of strategy to the game, because in this game you're going to be able to buy cards from your own faction's row, but also from the opponent's row. So when you do purchase a card from the opponent's row, you're hastening the arrival of their captain. And that's not a good thing, because when the captain comes out, he grants benefits to his faction. He also does something each turn. And he also can have an activated ability that the players from his faction can activate against you. So you don't really want a bunch of those captains out. If you get 3 captains out, they're all doing something every turn, and players are activating their abilities, and you know, so they're hammering. You don't want to get all their big guys out on the battlefield, but you do maybe want to clip that one guy in their row and get rid of him, or, you know, take cards away from the opponent. That's part of a deck building game like this. So, you know, you're trying to weigh those 2 considerations, because these are not randomized when the captains are coming out. You know they're coming after the 10th card, so you don't want that to come up sooner. So I like it. Each player takes 7 Guile and 3 Might cards. And so here, let's just cards. Could you read it? Each player takes 7 Guile. What is that? Each player takes 7 Guile cards and 3 Might cards and shuffles them to form their player deck. Each player then draws 5 cards from this deck to start the game. Okay, we made it. Alright, so there you have it, the setup. And Guile and Might, if we come over here, oh, wait a minute, I clicked something wrong. Here comes Internet Explorer to cause trouble. You can see Might is a basic starter card. It just gives you +1 to your combat. And Guile is a basic starter card that gives you +1 to your cunning. These kind of work like legendary. Recruit or attack. Cunning is your recruiting power, basically. And combat is your attack power. Here you got 7 Guile and 3 combat. Because Guile's going to be very important at the beginning of the game, and combat not so much. And most of the cards you buy, you're going to be buying, not most of them, but you're going to be buying to try and gain that extra combat. So you're going to get combat in that way. But this just gives you a little touch in case there's something you need to do. But yeah, so that's the setup. I think that's enough for now. Turn sequence is a whole other ball of wax. We'll get into that next time. Okay, so this is how I've chosen to deal with it. This is how I've been working. This is how, my mind thinks about this process. I'd be interested to hear what you think about it. And then next time when we come in, we'll get into the turn sequence, which is like even meatier in terms of game design stuff. How are we going to deal with turns and phases, and, what can you do and what can't you do, and when can you do it and when can't you do it. Okay, so thanks for checking in. I'll see you next time.